She said it loud enough for the parking valets to hear. The crowd turned. Nobody corrected her. The man she was laughing at was standing 10 feet away, keys in his hand, mud on his boots, next to a dented 2003 Ford F-250 with a cracked side mirror and a faded company name stenciled on the door. He did not look embarrassed. He did not look angry. His face held the particular stillness of a man who has been underestimated so many times that the experience has stopped producing any reaction at all. What Diane Carver did not know, what not one person in that parking lot knew, was that the road she drove to get there was his, not metaphorically, not historically. Legally, specifically, on paper, in a covenant, bearing his signature, filed with the county in 1997 and never properly transferred. Her entire development empire sat on land serviced by infrastructure he had designed, built, and never relinquished the rights to. She had been driving over his name every single day for 11 years. She laughed again, louder, and walked inside. He watched her go. Then he reached into the sun visor, checked a folded document he kept there, and followed her in. What happened inside that building rewrote the terms of everything she thought she owned. The thermometer on the porch was an old glass tube model, the kind hardware stores stopped carrying 20 years ago. It was nailed at a slight tilt to the post beside the front door, and every morning before she put on her shoes, Lily stood in front of it in her socks and read it aloud, not because anyone had asked her to, not because the information changed anything about what she wore. She just believed, with the complete conviction of an 8-year-old, that a day that began with knowing the temperature was a day that began correctly. That Tuesday in October, she pressed her nose close to the glass and announced that it was 41 degrees. "Is that cold?" she asked. Garrett Wills was at the kitchen counter pouring coffee into a thermos that had a dent in the side from the time it had fallen off a job site trailer. "Depends on what you're doing," he said. She thought about this with the seriousness she applied to most things. Bram was tucked under her left arm, a stuffed elephant, gray and flattened from years of being carried. One felt ear slightly darker than the other. From a washing machine incident she still talked about with some resentment. "What if you're standing outside watching someone build something?" she asked. "Then 41 is cold," he said. "Put your jacket on." She disappeared back inside. He heard the closet door, the particular drag of a zipper that had always stuck at the bottom. He stood at the counter and looked out the window at the yard. The F-250 sat in the gravel drive with its engine ticking as it cooled from the early morning run he'd made to a supply yard before she woke up. There was a crack in the passenger side mirror that he'd been meaning to replace for 2 years. He noticed it every morning and then did not replace it. This was not negligence. It was more like a choice he kept making without acknowledging he was making it, a kind of quiet stubbornness about certain things that had no practical explanation. The gravel lot where he ran his business was 12 minutes from the house. Wills grading and site prep, 6 employees, 2 excavators, a skid steer, and a flatbed trailer that burned oil. It was a real company that did real work: land clearing, drainage grading, foundation prep for residential builds, and the occasional commercial job. He was good at it the way some men are good at things that no one has ever thought to applaud. He showed up. He read terrain. He never had to be told something twice. What his clients did not know, what most people in his life did not know, was that he had spent 14 years before this doing something else entirely. There was a cardboard tube on the shelf above his workbench in the garage. It was sealed with a plastic cap at each end and had a strip of masking tape along its side with a date written in marker: March 1999. Inside it were the original rolled drawings for a 42-mile toll road corridor, the Meridian Corridor. Every elevation change, every drainage calculation, every load-bearing specification written in his hand. He had been the chief engineer, 31 years old when he took the assignment, 33 when the ribbon was cut. He had stood in a gray suit on a temporary platform beside the governor and watched the first car drive through, and felt something he had never been able to describe to anyone because there was no one in his life at that moment who would have understood what it meant to put a road through a mountain and have it hold. His wife had been there. She had worn a blue coat and stood at the edge of the crowd because she hated stages. And when he caught her eye, she had raised her coffee cup at him from 20 yards away like a toast. 4 years later, she was gone. A diagnosis in February, a funeral in September, and a 7-month window in between that rearranged every assumption he had ever made about what he was building his life toward. He left the firm the following spring. He did not make a ceremony of it. He signed what needed to be signed, packed 2 boxes, and drove home to a 4-year-old who was eating cereal in front of a cartoon and had no idea what any of it meant yet. He never went back. The covenant documents from the Meridian project, the legal instruments governing the engineering rights-of-way, had been filed with the county and were supposed to transfer to the firm's holding company the following year. The paperwork had been prepared. It had simply never been finalized. He had noticed this approximately 3 years after leaving. During a quiet afternoon when he was filing old documents into a storage box and found his copy of the original covenant still bearing his name as the sole registered engineer of record, he had set it aside. He had thought about calling the firm. He had not called. He had folded the document, placed it in the sun visor of the truck, and let the matter sit the way a man lets certain things sit when his life has moved in a direction that no longer intersects with his past. It sat there for 8 years. Lily came back into the kitchen with her jacket on, and Bram repositioned to her right arm. She climbed onto the stool at the counter and watched him screw the lid onto the thermos. "Dad," she said, "if you build something and then you leave, does it still belong to you?" He looked at her. She was looking at Bram and adjusting the elephant's ear with great care. "In some ways," he said. She nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something she had suspected. He drove her to school. The F-250 rattled over the Meridian interchange on-ramp the way it did every morning, the expansion joints thumping beneath the tires in their familiar rhythm. He did not look at the road the way someone who had built it might look at it. He just drove. The document shifted slightly in the sun visor when he took the curve. 3 miles ahead, in a glass tower above the city, Diane Carver was reviewing the permit timeline for her newest project, $180 million of mixed-use development, scheduled to break ground in the spring. It had taken 2 years to assemble. It was the largest deal her firm had ever done. The access road that made it viable ran directly through the Meridian Corridor. She had driven it that morning in the back of a black SUV, on a call, not looking out the window. She had no idea she was driving over someone's name. The State Infrastructure Summit was held every October at the Caldwell Convention Center, a glass and limestone building on the river that the city used whenever it wanted to feel serious about itself. The agenda ran 2 days. Day 1 was panels. Day 2 was working sessions where developers, contractors, and municipal planners sat at round tables and argued about permits and timelines and who owed whom a phone call. Attendance was invitation-based. Garrett had been invited because his firm held a grading contract on a state drainage project, and the project coordinator had put his name on a list without giving it much thought. He had almost not come. The issue that had stalled the summit's second day was not a small one. Carver Development Group's Northgate project, the $180 million mixed-use build that Diane Carver had been positioning for 2 years, had hit a legal obstruction that 3 different law firms and a title research company had been working on for 6 weeks without resolution. The problem was the Meridian Corridor easement. Specifically, a covenant clause embedded in the original 1997 engineering agreement that had never been discharged. The clause granted the engineer of record a residual right-of-way interest in any commercial development accessing the corridor within a defined boundary. That boundary encompassed the Northgate site exactly. The attorney who found it had described it to Carver's team as a ghost, technically valid, practically unenforceable, but legally present enough to cloud the title and freeze the permits. 2 title attorneys had tried to argue around it. One had suggested the covenant was effectively abandoned through non-assertion. The county recorder's office had declined to accept that argument. A second attorney had filed a quiet title motion. The motion was still pending. The permit office would not move until the title was clear. The spring groundbreaking date was in jeopardy. 6 weeks, 3 firms, $40,000 in legal fees. No resolution. That was the problem on the table when Garrett Wills pulled the F-250 into the convention center parking lot at 8:45 on a Tuesday morning. Lily was with him. She had a teacher in-service day, and no other arrangement had come together in time, so she sat in the passenger seat with Bram in her lap, wearing her jacket and looking at the building with the mild interest of someone who had been promised it would not take long. He had told her she could wait in the lobby and read. She had brought a book about horses and appeared satisfied with this plan. They walked in together. She found a chair near a potted fern in the lobby atrium and opened her book. He signed in at the registration table, received a lanyard with a paper badge, and moved toward the main hall where the working sessions were being set up. He was wearing what he always wore to anything that required him to be somewhere indoors: dark work pants, clean, but not pressed, and a canvas jacket, the color of old moss, with his company name embroidered on the chest in thread that had faded from navy to a muted gray. His boots were the same ones he wore on job sites. He had wiped the mud off them that morning in the truck cab with a rag he kept behind the seat. Diane Carver arrived at 9:15. She came through the main entrance with two people, a woman carrying a leather portfolio and a man on a phone, and moved through the lobby with the particular velocity of someone who considered stillness a waste. She was dressed in a charcoal wool coat over a slate blazer, her hair pulled back with a precision that suggested either a very good mirror or a very early start. She was known in the room before she entered it. 3 people angled toward her within 30 seconds of her arrival. She passed the registration table, received her lanyard without breaking stride, and pushed through the glass doors toward the parking lot to take a call. On her way back in, approximately 4 minutes later, she passed the row of vehicles near the entrance. She slowed. The F-250 was parked in the second spot from the door, not because Garrett had chosen it deliberately, but because it was the first open space he had found. It was visibly out of place among the leased sedans and SUVs that surrounded it. The cracked mirror caught the morning light. The company stencil on the door was faded. There was a dried mud line along the wheel well that the morning's wipe-down had not addressed. Carver looked at it. Then she looked up at the entrance, where a small cluster of attendees, contractors, a city planning officer, 2 men from the permit office had gathered near the doors waiting for the session to begin. She spoke loudly enough that no one could pretend not to hear. "Someone let the handyman park up front," she said. "Must be bring-your-groundskeeper-to-work day." There was laughter, not from everyone, but enough. The planning officer smiled into his coffee cup. One of the contractors, a man who had done work for Carver's firm and knew which direction his next contract might come from, laughed outright. The second permit office attendee looked at his phone. Lily had come to the lobby doors to look for her father when the session announcement was posted on the board near the entrance. She was standing just inside the glass, Bram under her arm, when she heard it. She looked at her father's back. He was standing at the edge of the group. He had heard it. His posture did not change. His hands stayed at his sides. He did not turn around to see who had said it, did not shift his weight, did not do the small, unconscious things people do when they are deciding how to respond to something. He looked at the F-250 for one moment steady, unhurried, and then he turned and walked through the doors into the building. Lily watched his face as he came through. She was looking for something specific in it, the way children look at their parents' faces to know whether a situation is serious. She found nothing alarming. His expression was the same one he wore when he was reading a drainage survey, careful, settled, moving toward something without announcing it. She fell into step beside him. "Did that lady say something mean?" she asked quietly. "She said something," he said. Lily considered this. They walked together toward the session hall, her book tucked under one arm and Bram under the other. "About the truck?" she asked. "About the truck," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "She doesn't know what kind of truck it is." He did not respond to this. He did not need to. He found his seat at the round table, assigned to regional contractors, set his badge flat on the table, and looked at the agenda sheet in front of him. At the top of the second page, under the heading Unresolved Easement Issues Northgate Corridor, his name was not listed. No one in the room knew it should have been. He read it anyway. Then he turned the paper over and waited for the session to begin. The session facilitator was a man named Arthur Plim from the county planning office, thin, careful, the kind of official who read every document twice and still apologized for missing things. He opened the Northgate easement discussion at 10:20, after the drainage presentation had run long, and he did it with the tone of a man who had already been told by 3 separate attorneys that this problem did not have a clean answer. He summarized the issue precisely: a residual right-of-way covenant attached to the Meridian Corridor engineering agreement, dated 1997, naming an engineer of record whose interest had never been formally discharged. The covenant was valid under the original filing. The county would not release the title cloud until either the interest was legally extinguished or the holder signed a formal quitclaim. The holder had never been contacted because, until 6 weeks ago, no one had known the covenant existed. Carver's attorney, a lean man named Forsyth, who had flown in from the firm's regional office, had a proposed resolution ready. A quiet title action was pending. He was confident the court would find the covenant constructively abandoned. The county recorder had pushed back on that position. The session, as he understood it, was to discuss whether any administrative solution existed that could move faster than the court timeline. The room was 14 people at 3 round tables: developers, planners, permit officers, contractors. A court reporter sat against the wall. 2 aides had laptops open. Diane Carver sat at the center table with Forsyth to her left and her portfolio manager to her right. She had a yellow legal pad and had already written several lines on it, though she had not looked at it since sitting down. Garrett Wills was at the far table, between a residential contractor named Pell and an empty chair. He had the agenda sheet in front of him, still turned face down. He had listened to the full summary without expression. When Plim finished and asked if anyone had questions before Forsyth continued, Garrett raised one hand. Plim looked at the badge. "Mr. Wills, go ahead." "The covenant," Garrett said. "Was it the original filed instrument or the amended version from March 1998? A pause. Forsyth looked at his file. "The original, dated November 1997. "Then the quiet title argument won't hold," Garrett said. "The March amendment included a non-abandonment clause, standard language at the time, but specific to Meridian contracts. It was added because the corridor crossed 3 county jurisdictions, and the firm wanted to prevent exactly this kind of title dispute. If the original filing is what's in the record, the amendment is attached to it. It's one instrument." The room was quiet in a way that felt different from the quiet that had been there before. Forsyth set his pen down. "You're familiar with the Meridian documentation?" Garrett looked at the agenda sheet in front of him. He turned it over. "I wrote it," he said. The words did not arrive with any weight behind them. He said them the way he might read a measurement off a survey line, factually, without inflection, because the fact was simply the fact. He reached into the inside pocket of his canvas jacket and removed a folded document. It was not new. The paper had the particular softness of something that had been folded and unfolded many times, the crease lines gone white. He opened it on the table in front of him and smoothed it flat with the side of his hand. It was the original covenant. The engineer of record signature line at the bottom bore his name in ink that had faded to brown at the edges. Pell, the contractor beside him, leaned slightly to read it. He said nothing. Plim had moved 2 steps closer to Garrett's table without appearing to realize he was doing it. He adjusted his glasses. "You're the engineer of record on the Meridian filing?" "Chief engineer," Garrett said. 1997 through completion. The covenant never transferred because the holding company paperwork wasn't finalized before I left the firm. I noticed it a few years later. Nobody had raised it, so I left it. Forsyth had opened his laptop and was typing. The sound of the keys was the only sound in the room for approximately 10 seconds. Then he stopped. He read something on his screen. He read it again. "Garrett Wills," he said, not to anyone in particular. "You were at Meridian Infrastructure Group." "I ran the engineering division," Garrett said. Forsyth turned the laptop so his assistant could see the screen. The assistant looked at it, then looked at Garrett, then looked back at the screen with the expression of someone recalibrating something they had already decided. Diane Carver had not spoken. She was holding her pen over the legal pad, but she was not writing. Her eyes were on the document on the table across the room, the folded, aged paper with the signature at the bottom, and something in her posture had changed. Not dramatically. Nothing she would have admitted to. But the forward angle she had held all morning, the slight lean that said she was running this room, had become vertical. She was sitting straight up. She was very still. Garrett was not looking at her. He was looking at Plim. "If the county needs a resolution that doesn't require the court timeline," Garrett said, "the holder of the covenant interest can sign a conditional release. It would need to specify the exact parcel boundaries and confirm the corridor access terms remain unchanged for public use. That clears the title. The county would accept it. I've seen it done on 2 other Meridian-adjacent parcels." Plim was writing. "And the holder of the interest is me," Garrett said. "I'm looking at the document right now." Lily had come in from the lobby 15 minutes earlier, quietly, and was sitting against the wall on a folding chair someone had left near the door, her horsebook closed on her knee. She had been watching her father's back. When the room went quiet after he put the document on the table, she looked around at the other faces. All of them were pointed at her father. She looked back at him. She leaned toward the woman sitting closest to her, one of Carver's aides, and whispered, "He built the road." The aide looked at her, then looked at Garrett, then looked back at the laptop screen where Forsyth was still reading. She did not respond to Lily, but she did not look away from Garrett either. Across the room, Diane Carver set her pen down on the legal pad. She placed it with a care that suggested she was controlling something. Her eyes moved from the document to the man who had produced it, the man in the faded canvas jacket, the man whose truck she had laughed at 45 minutes ago in front of 7 people. The man whose name was signed in faded ink at the bottom of the paper that currently held her entire project in suspension. For the first time since entering the building, she said nothing. The room continued without her. Plim was asking Garrett about the conditional release language. Garrett was answering with the particular patience of someone explaining something for the second time to someone paying close attention for the first. The session broke for lunch at 12:30. Most people moved toward the catering tables at the far end of the hall. Garrett stayed at his table and folded the covenant document back along its original creases carefully, each fold deliberate, following the lines that were already there. He returned it to his inside jacket pocket. He was reaching for his badge lanyard to leave when Forsyth appeared at his elbow, followed, 2 steps behind, by Diane Carver. She had left her portfolio manager at the other table. She had left her legal pad. She had come alone except for her attorney, and she had timed it so the room was thinning, not empty, but distracted, people filling plates and talking in clusters. No one pointed in their direction. She was composed. He would give her that. Whatever the last 90 minutes had cost her internally was not visible on her face. She held herself with the same forward certainty she had carried into the building that morning, though the angle of it had changed in some way he could not have precisely described. She was not leading with it. She was managing it. "Mr. Wills," she said, "I'm Diane Carver." "I know who you are," he said. He was still standing. He did not extend his hand. She did not flinch at this. "Forsyth tells me the conditional release is the fastest path. I'd like to discuss the terms." "There aren't terms," he said. "It's a standard release. The corridor access stays public. The parcel boundary is defined by the original survey. I sign it, you file it, the title clears." A pause. Something moved behind her eyes that was not quite surprise, but was adjacent to it, the expression of a person who had expected to be negotiating and had arrived at a conversation that was already over. "That's straightforward," she said. "It is," he said. Forsyth cleared his throat. Miss Carver's firm would want to express appreciation for the cooperation, given the timeline pressures. There are ways to structure that kind of— "I don't need appreciation structured," Garrett said. He said it without any edge. He said it the way he said most things as a fact, delivered cleanly, already moving past it. Lily had appeared at the edge of the room. She had finished her book and was looking for him. scanning the thinning crowd with the focused expression she used when she was tracking something she'd temporarily lost. She spotted him and began to move in his direction, Bram under her arm. Carver saw her. She looked at the girl for a moment, at the stuffed elephant, at the worn jacket that mirrored her father's in miniature, at the unhurried way she was crossing the room as though she belonged anywhere her father was. Something crossed Carver's face that was not calculation. It was faster than that and less controlled, and it was gone almost immediately. Garrett stepped forward, not dramatically, not with any visible intent, just one quiet step that placed him between Carver and Lily's path without drawing attention to the fact that this was what he was doing. He turned his head slightly toward his daughter. "Hey, Bug, go grab something from the food table. I'll be there in 1 minute." Lily looked at him. She looked briefly at the two people standing with him, reading the room the way she always read his face, quietly and without comment. Then she turned and walked toward the catering table, Bram swinging from her hand. Garrett turned back. Carver was watching the girl walk away. When she looked back at Garrett, some of the management had gone out of her expression. What remained was less certain and more honest, and it was not comfortable for either of them. "This morning," she began. "Don't," he said. Not harshly. The word arrived flat and final, like a door that has been closed without slamming. You know it's shut. You know it isn't opening. There's nothing to discuss about it. She held his gaze for 2 seconds. Then she looked at Forsyth, and something passed between them that was not a conversation but functioned as one, and Forsyth closed his file. "Plim will have the release form drafted by end of day," Forsyth said. "We'll need your availability to sign." "I'll be at this address," Garrett said, and wrote his office number on the back of a blank agenda sheet with the pen from his badge lanyard. He handed it to Forsyth without looking at Carver again. Then he picked up his lanyard, walked to the catering table, and stood beside Lily while she decided between 2 identical-looking bread rolls with the gravity of someone making an important choice. "Which one?" she asked. He pointed to the one on the left. She took it, pulled a small piece off for herself, and handed him the rest without being asked. He ate it standing up, looking at nothing in particular, while the room moved around them. Carver left shortly after. He did not watch her go. The county permit office scheduled the formal signing for 2 weeks later, on a Thursday morning, in a conference room on the 4th floor of the municipal building on Hargrove Street. It was not a dramatic venue. Drop ceilings, fluorescent lighting with one tube slightly dimmer than the others, a long laminate table with chairs that did not match. The window looked out onto a parking structure. Someone had placed a tray of water glasses at the center of the table, and the tray had a crack in it that nobody had addressed. It was, in other words, the kind of room where real things get decided. Plim was there. 3 people from the county recorder's office. Forsyth and 2 associates from Carver's legal team. A representative from the State Infrastructure Authority who had driven 2 hours because someone in his office had finally pulled the full Meridian file and understood what they were looking at, and a woman named Dr. Sandra Osei from the State Historic Infrastructure Registry, who had requested to attend after reading the preliminary documents and had not explained the full reason for her interest until she sat down. Garrett arrived 7 minutes early. Lily was with him again, a half-day at school, another arrangement that had not come together. She sat in a chair against the wall with Bram and a packet of crackers she had brought from home, watching the room fill with the patient attention of a child who has learned that her father's business takes as long as it takes. The release document was 12 pages. Garrett read all of it. He read it in the particular way he read technical documents, slowly, without any performance of thoroughness, just actual thoroughness, 1 paragraph at a time, twice through on the sections that carried legal weight. Forsyth watched him do this with the expression of a man who had been prepared to answer questions and was now being quietly surprised by the questions not being necessary. Garrett signed on page 11, his name in the same deliberate hand that had signed the original covenant 27 years earlier. Plim countersigned. The county recorder initialed 3 places. The state infrastructure representative signed as witness. Then Dr. Osei opened her own folder. She had requested 5 minutes, she said, to address something the registry had identified in the course of reviewing the Meridian documentation. She said it to the room, but she was looking at Garrett. The Meridian Corridor, she explained, was being considered for State Historic Infrastructure designation, a classification given to engineering projects of particular technical distinction and lasting public impact. The corridor had been nominated 18 months earlier by a preservation group. The review process required full documentation of the original engineering team. That documentation had been incomplete because the engineer of record had never been formally credited in the project's public record. The firm's name was there. His name was not. She set a document on the table in front of him. It was a single page, a certification form from the registry, bearing the state seal. At the top, Meridian Corridor Infrastructure Project, Engineer of Record. Below it, in the designated field, was a blank line. She uncapped a pen and placed it beside the form. "We'd like to correct that," she said. The room had gone, the particular quiet that conference rooms go when the thing that was supposed to be administrative has turned into something else. The recorder's office representative had stopped writing. One of Forsyth's associates had set down her pen. The state infrastructure man was looking at the form on the table with an expression that suggested he was recalculating the significance of the drive he had made that morning. Garrett looked at the blank line for a moment. Then he picked up the pen and wrote his name. The registry designation, Dr. Osei explained, came with a formal acknowledgment grant, a recognition payment tied to the historic certification. The standard amount for a principal engineer of record on a corridor of this scale and public impact was $240,000. It was not a number that made anyone in the room gasp. But it sat there, stated plainly in the fluorescent light, and it meant something specific, that the work he had done, and left without ceremony, and driven over in a cracked mirror truck for 11 years without saying a word about, was now on a state document with his name attached to it. Permanently, publicly, correctly. Lily had come to stand beside him at some point during Dr. Osei's explanation. She was looking at the form on the table at the state seal, at his name, in his own handwriting, in the blank field. She could not have understood the full structure of what had just happened. She understood her father's face. She read it the way she read the thermometer every morning carefully, looking for the true number. What she found there was not triumph, exactly. It was something quieter. The expression of a man who has set something down after carrying it for a long time, not dropped it, not thrown it, just set it down in the right place, at the right moment, with no audience necessary. He placed his hand once on the top of her head, briefly, then removed it. Forsyth gathered his papers without comment. The county recorder thanked everyone for their time. Plim shook Garrett's hand with both of his. Diane Carver had not attended. She had sent Forsyth. But as people were gathering their things to leave, the door opened and she stepped in alone, no portfolio manager, no aide, and crossed directly to where Garrett was standing. She did not make a speech. She had not come to make one. She extended her hand. He looked at it for one breath. Then he shook it, briefly, firmly, without anything added. She left before he did. He was home by 2:15. That was the thing nobody would have written down as significant, but it was. He was home before the light changed, before the afternoon went gray at the edges, before Lily's school bus had even made the first stop on her route. He pulled the F-250 into the gravel drive and sat in it for a moment with the engine off, listening to the tick of it settling, looking at the thermometer on the porch post with its slight tilt to the left. He went inside and started dinner. Nothing elaborate. He quartered potatoes and put them in a pan with olive oil and rosemary from the small pot on the kitchen windowsill. He salted them by hand, turning the pan once, then set it in the oven. He made a simple green salad in the large wooden bowl that had been his wife's, the one with the crack along the base that he had glued twice and that held anyway. He set 2 plates. He folded 2 paper towels into rough triangles beside them. He heard the bus at 3 to 10, then the front gate. Then her boots on the porch, steps the particular rhythm of a child who is not in any hurry, but is also not dawdling, just moving at the speed of someone whose day was fine and whose home is where she was going. The door opened. She came in, dropped her bag on the hook, and stood in front of the thermometer the way she always did, reading it aloud to no one in particular. 43 degrees. Then she came inside and found him at the counter. "You're home," she said, not with surprise. Exactly. More like satisfaction, the way someone says a thing when the fact of it is better than they expected, but they are not willing to make a production of it. "I'm home," he said. She put Bram on the stool at the counter and climbed up beside him. The oven was warm. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and something underneath it, a wood smoke quality from the old oven's element that had always been there, that she had never known a kitchen without. She watched him stir the salad. After a while, she said, "Dad, did the road know it was waiting for you?" He looked at her. She was picking a small thread from Bram's ear with the focused attention she gave to things that required patience, not looking up. The question already released into the room, and no longer hers to manage. He did not answer it. He looked at her for a moment, and then he looked at the kitchen drawer beside the stove, the one that stuck slightly in damp weather where the covenant document now lived, folded in its soft creases, no longer in the sun visor, no longer between him and whatever came next. Just there, in the drawer, quiet. He turned back to the salad. The oven clicked. The light outside the window was still gold. He did not turn it off yet. Some men build the ground beneath other people's feet and never ask to be thanked for it.